The storm had barely settled when Ethan, the single dad who had risked his life to save a dying stranger just days earlier, found himself pacing outside the hospital again, unable to shake the strange heaviness in his chest. He didn't know why the girl he saved mattered to him so much, or why her fragile breathing and trembling hands haunted his nights, but something inside him refused to let go. Her name Ariana echoed in his mind, delicate yet strong, like someone carrying a history she didn't talk about. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her lying in his arms on that deserted road, bleeding and whispering something he still couldn't fully understand. His own daughter, Lily, tugged at his shirt constantly, asking if the lady daddy saved was going to be okay, and Ethan wished he had an answer. All he knew was that saving her had stirred memories he had buried, memories of failing to save the mother of his child, memories of helplessness that had shaped his entire life. Something about Ariana felt painfully familiar, as though fate had intertwined their stories long before he carried her into the ER. Days later, when Ariana finally opened her eyes, the first thing she whispered was his name, not because she knew him, but because she had been told about the man who didn't hesitate to risk everything for a stranger. Ethan stood at the doorway, unsure if he should walk in, afraid she might feel uncomfortable or confused, but her eyes sought him immediately, soft and uncertain, as though she had been waiting for him. He stepped closer, heart pounding, noticing the bruises on her arms, the stitched wound on her forehead, and the exhaustion in her trembling smile. She thanked him in a quiet voice that didn't belong to someone used to being ignored. She sounded like someone who had spent her life being admired, feared, or envied but rarely cared for. When she spoke about the attack, her voice cracked, revealing a vulnerability she tried to hide. Ethan listened in silence, realizing she wasn't just recovering from injury, she was recovering from a world that expected perfection from her, a world he wasn't part of, yet somehow felt responsible to shield her from now. Over the next week, Ariana became a part of Ethan's small world without either of them planning it. Lily adored her and often climbed into the hospital bed just to hold her hand, chattering about school, her drawings, and her daddy's terrible cooking. Ariana laughed, genuinely, maybe for the first time in years, and Ethan noticed how her entire face changed when she smiled, less like a CEO's daughter and more like a girl who had never known simple kindness. Ethan brought homemade soup, awkwardly packaged sandwiches, and books Lily thought she would like. He didn't do it out of obligation, something in him pulled him back every day. Even the nurses whispered about how Ariana softened whenever he entered the room. Ethan, however, kept his distance emotionally, convincing himself that once she healed, she would return to her world of luxury, wealth, and corporate power, a world where he, a single father with 2 jobs, clearly did not belong. But everything shifted the day Ariana tried to stand and collapsed straight into Ethan's arms, her body trembling from pain and fear she had been suppressing. She apologized repeatedly, embarrassed and frustrated, tears slipping down her cheeks. Ethan held her gently, telling her it was okay, telling her she didn't need to pretend to be strong around him. For a moment, she clung to him not as a stranger, not as the daughter of his strict CEO, but as someone who desperately needed to feel safe. Ethan realized then that he had crossed an invisible line inside his heart, one he thought had died years ago. Ariana wasn't just a stranger he saved anymore. She had become someone he couldn't walk away from, someone who unknowingly made him feel alive again. When she finally steadied herself and whispered, "Please don't leave," something inside him shattered and rebuilt all at once. Meanwhile, at Ethan's workplace, chaos erupted when the CEO Ariana's father discovered that his daughter had been missing for days, found brutally attacked, and was now recovering in the care of an employee he barely knew. The CEO's fury spread through the company like fire, not because he suspected Ethan, but because he feared losing his only child. Rumors spread quickly, and Ethan found himself called into the CEO's office without warning. He walked in expecting accusations, maybe even termination, but instead faced a broken, exhausted man who had been pacing for hours. When the CEO demanded to know every detail about how Ethan had found Ariana, Ethan recounted everything quietly, respectfully, never once mentioning the emotional bond forming between them. He kept his feelings locked away, certain that a man like him could never fit into their world and that Ariana's father would never approve. But to Ethan's shock, the CEO didn't threaten him. Instead, he gripped Ethan's shoulder with trembling hands and thanked him with a sincerity that left Ethan speechless. The man who was feared by thousands suddenly looked like a father terrified of losing the only person he loved. He asked Ethan to personally continue watching over Ariana until she was strong enough to return home. Ethan hesitated, knowing this would only pull him deeper into feelings he wasn't supposed to have, but he agreed. When he returned to Ariana's room, she looked up with relief so visible it nearly brought tears to his eyes. She reached for his hand, unafraid, leaving Ethan caught between gratitude and fear of how easily she was becoming an essential part of his life. As Ariana healed, she began opening up about her life, the loneliness behind her wealth, the expectations that crushed her, the absence of real friendships, and the pressure of being groomed to take over an empire she never wanted. Ethan listened without judgment, offering quiet comfort that came from genuine empathy, not pity. In return, Ariana learned about Lily, about the grief Ethan carried, about the nights he worked late so his daughter wouldn't go hungry, about the guilt that never left him. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, drifting into emotional spaces neither had expected to share. Slowly, their worlds so different, so distant began intertwining naturally, as though fate had been waiting for the right moment to push them together. One afternoon, when Ethan arrived with Lily, Ariana surprised them by sitting up on her own, dressed in simple clothes rather than hospital gowns. She looked softer, freer, like someone stepping into a life she finally chose. She asked Ethan if he could take her outside for fresh air. He wheeled her into the garden, Lily skipping ahead, and for the first time, Ariana felt what peace was supposed to feel like, not board meetings, not expectations, not gated mansions. Just sunlight, laughter, and Ethan walking beside her. When she thanked him again for saving her, Ethan shook his head, insisting anyone would have done the same. But Ariana knew better. Men didn't risk their lives for strangers. Men didn't show up every day without expecting anything in return. Men didn't look at her the way Ethan did, with honesty instead of motive. That was when the truth began sinking into Ariana's heart. She cared for him, deeply, unexpectedly, almost painfully. She cared for the man who saved her, who protected her without hesitation, who respected her without knowing her status, who saw her not as a CEO's heir but as a human being. But she also feared that once she returned to her world, Ethan would pull away, convinced she belonged somewhere higher, richer, untouchable. She wished she could tell him he was wrong, that she had never felt safer or happier than when she was with him and Lily. Yet the words stayed trapped, heavy inside her, because she wasn't sure if Ethan felt the same or if he was simply being kind. Little did either of them know, fate was preparing to turn everything upside down. Ethan was about to learn Ariana's true identity, not from her lips, but from her furious father bursting into the hospital garden, security guards trailing behind him, calling out her full name with authority that shattered the fragile peace. Ethan froze, Lily clinging to his leg, as Ariana's father rushed to her and embraced her tightly. The CEO then turned, eyes widening in disbelief when he recognized who Ethan truly was, the same struggling employee he had once dismissed without a second thought, now the man his daughter trusted more than anyone. And in that moment, everything tangled together: gratitude, class difference, forbidden affection, guilt, fear, and a silent truth both Ethan and Ariana had been avoiding. Because now the world knew. And nothing would ever be the same again.